Well, hello here, everybody. Oh, it looks like we have 10 people, which is a fair number for just opening up a show where I'm going to sit around and talk about the Star Wars prequels. So, uh, yeah, welcome, everybody. This is an unusual thing. I wouldn't have necessarily pictured myself sitting here streaming about something like this, but here we are. Uh, I don't know. This maybe seems like kind of a petty, silly thing to sit around and talk about, but I think it's kind of fun. I think, and you can tell from the comments, this evokes some feelings in people. So, hello, Zach A commented quite a bit earlier today. Excellent choice. See you tonight. Scuzz Bopper, hello back to you. Tyler, the content creator. Oh boy, this is going to be a rough ride. And Dark Side of Delight Production says howdy. So, welcome everybody. It is nice to see you here. By the way, these glasses, you've probably started seeing them more and more. They're going to be around for a while, probably around more than you're used to seeing, because it's getting harder and harder to see when I'm streaming. So, I'll be wearing these a bit, looking a little bit much more like an old man. So I just thought it'd be fun to do this because number one, there are a lot of comments to this video, and I think it's worth clarifying a little bit of where I'm coming from. More than that, when you're talking about something like any movie, especially something like the Star Wars prequels, where there's a lot of different feelings about it, there's just a lot of different ways to tackle it from, and a lot of different, you can't anticipate everything you might want to say about it. So these just, if nothing else, bring up a lot more avenues for talking about these movies. And on top of it all, uh, you know, it's easy to accidentally step on some toes when you're saying certain things, especially if you're just generally low key insulting Star Wars, like I could have sounded like I was doing. My perspective, I was a very huge Star Wars fan. If you want to hear my Star Wars testimony, one of my very first memories was of seeing Star Wars in a theater in 1977 when I was 2 years old. I recall seeing Princess Leia putting the tapes into R2-D2, and at my age, I thought she was feeding him crackers. And for the most part, I just thought that the bad guys were robots and the good guys were people. And I took all the stormtroopers as being robots, and thought, well, I was a little confused when Han and Luke dressed up in stormtrooper uniforms, why the robots were fighting each other. Since then, I liked it as a kid, and then I had a little bit of a resurgence in enjoyment of the movies when I was like a teenager and young adult. And for a while, I was kind of the Star Wars guy. Everyone was getting me Star Wars stuff for gifts and everything. And so I was really, really into it. I super anticipated the prequels, and I said this in my original video. And I had that little bit of sinking feeling that turned into disappointment as I was watching The Phantom Menace. And every single movie, I hoped it would be a little bit better. The Attack of the Clones. I had a little bit of hope for that would be a little more, I don't know if sober is the right word, but there'd be a little bit more to it than a silly kid and Jar Jar and stuff. But I think it's probably the worst of the three, just in terms of being dreary and boring. And then, of course, everyone thought that the final one, I'm spacing on the names for some reason. It's really boding well for my decision to speak on this. What's the name of the last one? I'm having just an old person moment here. Revenge of the Sith. Thank you, Tyler, the content creator. And of course, you think that's going to be the darkest one of the three, and he actually becomes Darth Vader and stuff like that. I don't know. It was silly. I didn't care that much for it. That's my personal journey. I'm not saying everyone has to see it that way. Obviously, considering what I'm here to do, which is read comments about this, there is going to be some difference of opinion about this. But that was my feeling. And I was excited when the sequel trilogy was starting to come out. There's a little more energy to it. It looks a little more real due to more practical effects. Everyone was talking about that. First one was fun, but a little silly, and I don't know, had a lot of appeal to the fan base. What do they call it? Fan service. And the second one I just found so tedious. By the second one, I was just kind of with Star Wars. And from there, I kind of land where I do now, which is the first three movies. They're pretty fun. They're pretty good. Return of the Jedi, you're starting to see a lot of cracks. Harrison Ford had better things to do than to be there, and it had a lot of silliness in it. But yeah, that's where I am now. I don't think they're terrible movies. Uh, I I think the first two are pretty darn good. Return of the Jedi's all right, a little bit. I don't know, a little bit weak. And then from there, I just didn't really care much for any of it. Uh, there are positives and negatives to all of it, but I guess instead of sitting here babbling about it, the best thing to do is get to the comments. By the way, hello, Jessica Bell. Said I tried a couple years ago. I tried to rewrite the Phantom Menace as a radio play, but life just kept getting in my way. I never had the free time or mental health to finish it. That's very interesting. I thought of rewriting that when I was younger, just rewriting like a not a screenplay, but just or a radio play or whatever, but just like a story version of it where I would try to just improve upon it and make it better. I had some different ideas, but I don't know. That was at the time of life where I always had ideas and never got around to it. And now it just feels like a bit too much of my life to spend on that kind of thing. Anonymous insignificant person. Hello. Old person moment that happens to me all the time as having been born in the early 2000s. Oh, I was born a little bit before then. Drew Harrison, my favorite was Return of the Jedi, but it came out when I was 8. When it came out, and it brings back good memories. You know, that's a big part of this. A lot of what I like about Star Wars, I think, is specific to what I remember from certain times of life. You know, Empire Strikes Back was so I saw Star Wars, but I was 2 years old. So what are you going to even think about it? Empire Strikes Back was the part of Star Wars that came out when I was like old enough to really start remembering it and being into it. For my 5th birthday, my mom took me to the store and bought me some action figures and a Millennium Falcon playset and stuff like that. So obviously, Empire is generally considered the best of the movies, but I do have this bit more nostalgia for it. So part of this is I recognize that if I extrapolate from that to how other people are going to feel about the prequels or whatever other movie they were that were out when they were at that age, I can see how there's kind of a nostalgic draw for it. That's not to be condescending and say if you like the prequels, it's all just nostalgia, but whatever. Zach A, the real question is, have you watched Star Kid musical Annie? I have not. I did not even know that existed. You could be pranking me and I wouldn't even know it right now. So that said, let's get to some of the comments. That's what we're here to do, is read through these comments. I also want to say I'm not here to argue with any of these. This is all in fun. And if anything, I just want to get a little bit more perspective. Like I said, have more angles to talk about this show from. And I think most of these comments are okay. All these comments are valid to some extent or another. Oh yeah, Hardware Wars was fun. I've never seen that one, to be honest. I always heard about that one. I would have never even known where to get it when I was younger. Jessica Bell brought up the Star Wars holiday special. Don't forget about it. I actually will not forget about it. Okay, we're getting me distracted from the comments again, but back when the internet was fairly new and you would just go into you use dial up and go, everything was text based, and you'd go into these news groups and stuff. I actually bought a VHS copy of the holiday special that somebody had recorded from TV, and they mailed it to my house. So that was pretty cool. This is how old everything was back then. There was no video file sharing. There wasn't even graphics on the internet back then, at least that I'm aware of, unless you downloaded an image file from somebody or something like that. Like you couldn't view it on your screen. But I actually went to the post office, bought a money order, and mailed this person a money order who I heard from over the internet, and they mailed me the tape back. So I guess I would have been a con artist dream back then. But yeah, that thing was hot trash. Tyler, content creator, no matter how bad Star Wars gets, it'll never be as bad as the holiday special. I would agree with that. It's objectively bad, but still fun. Yeah, it depends on your perspective. I don't know. I thought it was tedious, but I watched it back when I probably took Star Wars a little too seriously. What I was expecting, honestly, from it was a disproportionately high amount of Boba Fett cartoon and not enough Wookiees sitting around doing little skits and having songs and dance numbers and watching a dad be really disturbing in the middle of the living room. The prequels did give us Star Wars: The Third Gathers Backstroke of the West. Hilarious mistranslated fan dub. So there's that. Never heard of that. Boy, there's all kinds of ideas here that sound interesting, and I'll probably not have time to get around to. If there's anything like this that you think I'd enjoy watching, leave it in the comments, and you can tell me where to find it. It'll probably get away from me in the chat, but leave it in the comments, and maybe I'll get around to watching some of this stuff, especially if it's available online. All right, so let's look at some comments. Feel free to keep chiming in if you have anything to say about what I'm saying on the screen, or just any comments in general. Go ahead and keep the conversation going. Let's see. I put these in order that they appeared on the video, and I'm going to go through every single one. So if some of the really long ones, I am going to have to, kind of brush through just for the sake of time. So these are just start to finish. So I will get to yours if I don't spend as much time as you're hoping. I'm sorry. There's only so much time. Fletcher from the Deep. Wait, is this a stream? I thought it was a video. Yes, it's a stream, or else it's a little uncanny that I'm able to read your comment. I'm a little offended that you can't tell the difference between me streaming and me doing a recorded video. So maybe that maybe that just says something to the quality of my recorded content, or maybe I'm just an excellent streamer. That would be weird. All right, Game Time Y. First comment of the video. I disagree with you. I've always liked the prequel since they came out. I do appreciate your take, though. I don't think they were perfect, and wish the love stuff had either been better or just removed, but the world building was amazing and made the galaxy feel so much better. No worries, Fletcher from the Deep. That's totally understandable. So obviously, you disagree with me. I'm probably going to disagree with you back. If you love the prequels, that's great. I'm not here to dump on you for that. That's my personal opinion. I don't like it. Story-wise, I could see why people like it. Execution-wise, I still personally don't understand how people can enjoy it, just because the way it's executed feels so boring. But again, that's just me. I'm not objectively better for you than you because of that. I do agree with you about the love stuff, though. Boy, that love story was just tedious and obviously hilariously written. I'm going to quit trying to read all these names, I guess. Issa Jan. I think the Clone Wars show solves a lot of the problems you have with the prequels. I'm not eloquent enough to explain why, but they just make the prequels very good. Yeah, I got a couple comments to this effect, and I could see what you're saying. However, and you probably know I'm going to say this, that doesn't really, even if the Clone Wars show has a lot of the elements the movie's missing, they still are missing from the movie. So I'm not talking about whether there's any kind of story out there anywhere that has the parts that I'm saying are missing from the prequels. I'm just saying that if you just go to sit down in a theater and watch the prequels, obviously it's not the story you're watching is not helped by the fact that some other content exists in another movie. So if we're talking about the fact that the good guys seem unaware of what the Emperor was doing, or Darth, the fact that Anakin showed some signs of becoming Darth Vader or something like that. Yeah, the problem isn't that doesn't exist somewhere in the universe. The problem is it's not presented to you as an audience sitting in the theater watching the original movies. So Fletcher from the Deep, good point. A good movie shouldn't require homework. I guess that's basically what I'm trying to say. It shouldn't require homework, but then again, I'm not criticizing the totality of the lore. I'm criticizing how it's presented within this story. And if you aren't emphasizing that particular part of the story during that movie, it's still not dramatically going to be good. Again, not saying that you're wrong. If you watch the prequels and feel like the story is vindicated or just enriched by having watched the Clone Wars show, that's great. Obviously, it shouldn't require homework, but if that makes your experience better, that's valid too. So it's all just a love fest here, right? Jessica Bell says, if you're just listening and not watching closely, this is a chat, not a comment. On paper, as a mere storyline, the prequels could have been a story so epic and grand that it would have competed with Lord of the Rings. Yeah, that's probably true. If you look at what was going to happen in the prequels, I think there are some weaknesses with the very idea of a prequel. And it's really hard to tell what the prequels could have been. And I'm not saying this to argue the point, because I definitely see your point, and I think they could have been something super amazing. There was a lot of potential there. Uh, but part of me wonders, and this is just purely speculation because I'm torn about this. Part of me wonders if uh, the prequels would have just never lived up to what people thought in their heads, uh, or what people were expecting in their heads. And part of this is my experience having come in as a young person who had already seen the first three movies. Like I said in the original video, having watched the videos and having seen that episode 4 scroll up in the beginning of the first movie. I'm not going to call it A New Hope. That's what young kids call it. I'm too old for all that. It's just Star Wars. But when I first saw the episode 4 thing crawl up there and started realizing that there were thinking that there was another story in there, and then hearing Obi-Wan allude to the older times with the Jedi and the Clone Wars and all that stuff, that exists as something totally different in your head than it ever could in reality on a movie. So I don't know if this is just based on my experience, if a movie could have ever lived up to that, or if seeing a concrete story would have just been a letdown. And I don't know if that's totally different for somebody who didn't grow up just having seen the first movies. I don't know. Yeah, Fletcher, it didn't say episode 4 in the original release, but by the time I was old enough to have started seeing it, it was always there. They added it for some reason. I don't know. Jessica Bell says yes, because after 1,000 years of peace, the Jedi have gotten lazy, lost their skills and ability since the dark side was compromised. I'm not sure what that's directly in reference to. I know probably in general it's in reference to how they weren't really sensing what the Emperor was up to. Again, sorry, I keep calling him the Emperor because that's just what I'm used to seeing the character as from having grown up so much with the original movies. All right, let's get to another comment finally. Tyler, the content creator, said, I can say one thing that ruined them in 2 words: George Lucas. Yeah, there's probably a bit of sentiment along those lines out there on the internet. Some people might take exception to that, but of course, especially with the Plinkett reviews having set a lot of the tone for the discourse, George Lucas hatred is a little, it's gotten a little intense probably. Tyler, the content creator, he's here in the chat as well. He's my son, so I was going to make fun of him, but I'll just leave it alone. I think, as his name indicates, he probably makes some content. I don't know. Tyler, have you been making any content? I watch every once in a while and you do some chess stuff, but I'm not sure what. Well, tell everyone in the chat and hype up your channel, I guess. But yeah, it's an interesting question to me of how much of a visionary and how good a filmmaker George Lucas really is. The first movie, from what I understand, was saved a lot in post-production editing and by John Williams' soundtrack. And then the other 2 original movies were directed by other people. So it's really hard to tell how great he really was as a filmmaker. I think he had a really good vision and a lot of interesting ideas. I'm not totally discounting that, but then considering he hasn't really taken off with much else, THX 1138 was kind of interesting. But I don't know, his inability to really develop a rounded filmography, and then of course the quality of the sequels, coming from my perspective, kind of makes you wonder. Zach A says, the Emperor is the character. He's just using the form of Sheev in the prequels. I don't know what that means. I'm sorry. You'll probably be a little disappointed in the depth of my Star Wars lore. Jessica Bell, I heard that George Lucas only actually wanted to executive produce the sequels, but no one was willing to write a screenplay or direct his movies, so he was forced to do all 3 himself. I did not know that. I thought he just wanted to exercise a lot of creative control. Anonymous saying, significant person, I view the love story as selfishness on Anakin's part. I think of Anakin's toxic take on love as a critical part of his decline, and therefore the tragedy of the prequels. I think there definitely is something there. I think that's a good observation. Problem, of course, a lot is in the execution. That story could have been told very, very, very well if it had been told entirely different from how it was. Sheev Palpatine is his name. Thank you. Tyler, content creator, no content recently. By the way, I really love George Lucas. He just really struggles with execution sometimes. Fair enough. Here we got a long one. I mostly agree with your criticisms. I think the story is really cool, but this isn't because of the movies, and that's why the movies are bad. They didn't get me invested in the political conflicts. I'm going to start breezing through some of this because it is kind of long. His dream about Padme was nonsense. Why turn on everyone? Yeah, that's a good question. And that's why some of this is clumsy. I think you could have shown him starting to gradually, I don't know, starting to see bad or out of control traits gradually manifest for organic reasons that feel comprehensible, not just have him suddenly turn on everybody because he has a dream and then the Emperor says, oh, you could make her be alive again. That felt really clunky to me. And then he says, where I don't necessarily agree as you saying it should be hinted more clearly from an earlier point of how Palpatine's manipulating everybody. I think it's fair if it's obvious in hindsight, but the cool thing about the character is how he deceives successfully. So as a baseline, I'd be against changing that, especially the characters staying in the dark is an important part. Although I agree, it'd be nice if they noticed something was off, only for them to be, no way it could have been Palpatine. He's been too helpful in fighting the rebels. Yeah. So I get that. I think having him be a clever manipulator, and I think there's been a lot of comments along these lines, having him be a clever manipulator is part of the whole point. If everybody saw what he was doing, that'd be silly. What I would have liked to have seen is him, and I think I expressed this in my original video, though I'm not sure how well. I would have liked to have seen him basically just be an effective, sorry, I'm spacing on the word again, an effective populist leader. So basically, he's very good at manipulating the public in general and most people around him. But there's, pockets of people here and there, almost like something that might apply to our current political landscape today. People to varying degrees see what he's doing. I think you have to give people enough credit to recognize that some people are going to recognize that something's a little off. And even if not most people, some people. And there's two different conversations that really could be had here. One is about how realistic this is and how you like the idea of Palpatine being clever enough to manipulate everybody. The other one is the question of how much do the main characters have to know in order to be effective protagonists? And those are kind of two different questions. And I personally think that this could be resolved by having the Emperor have basically fooled most of the public, and then having a couple core people notice something's wrong, maybe be a little bit seduced at the beginning, but fairly early on start to recognize that something's a little bit off and started to push against it. And my problem is, whatever you want the Emperor to be and however clever you want him to be and stuff like that, without anybody noticing something's wrong, then nobody's struggling against him, and there's no conscious conflict between the protagonists and their general environment, whether that's the Emperor himself or whether that's the entire political environment around them. So yeah, I guess that's where I see the difference. And I can understand the other side of this. And I'm not sure exactly where you would draw that line or how you would portray it. But I just personally think everybody was way too in the dark, and it just made it kind of blah. Everyone's just kind of wandering. It reminds me a little bit of, I don't remember which one. It's one of the Spider-Man movies where he's like, it's where he gets a lot of Tony Stark's, a lot of his technology, and he ends up going on a big field trip to another country or something. I'm being really stupid about this. But one criticism people had about that is Peter Parker didn't really make any decisions in that movie. He was just being led around. And that's what I feel like is happening. Most of the main characters in this movie are not even aware of what's happening and are not making conscious decisions. They're just I'm not saying they're making no decisions, but I don't feel like they're making any informed decisions. Probably far from home. Thanks, guys, Bopper. Making any conscious decisions about what's happening around them. That's, again, a lot of this, like I said in the video, for everything I say, there can be some counter argument about, well, actually, they did know this here, and here. And I'm not saying, well, actually, in a sarcastic way. It's all just a matter of how aware they were and how much that became an effective part of the drama. Uh, Jessica Bell says we see a lot of evidence of Anakin being emotionally maldeveloped, struggling to process, understand his feelings, and that flourish in clones. Obi-Wan is playing detective in all of Attack of the Clones. He gets closer to the answer, and then the Clone Wars start, and he just has to go to war. Yeah, and part of this is part of the weaknesses here, and I haven't seen these things in a while, but I know that he was trying to track some stuff down, but I don't think he was. And again, this is just a matter of personal opinion, a matter of taste, how far you want their knowledge to go. I didn't get that his suspicions and what he was chasing down was rooted in anything having to do with suspicion of Palpatine or anything like that. It felt like what he was chasing around was a little bit aimless. And I might be wrong. I'm not trying to argue a point, and I don't know that I'm 100% correct about this. I didn't get any central thrust where he was troubled by the Emperor or trying to push back or really understood what was going on with the clones and going and trying to prove it. It was just like finding little hints and chasing him down. So again, he was taking actions, but to me anyway, it felt like he was in the dark. And I might just be misinformed about that to a large extent. I am not getting through these really quickly. I'll try to move a little faster. I think Revenge of the Sith is good. Feels like it kind of does some of what you're talking about belatedly. On the other hand, I think a major theme of the prequels of the Jedi are incompetent. They're too complacent, entrenched in the system, and have lost sight of their roles. So I think having them be on the ball investing in the Sith would be at odds of that. And they say one improvement that could have been made was with having Obi-Wan take on the role of the voice of reason. That's really what this movie needed, I think, was a stronger voice of reason. A lot of the objections are the Jedi were at a certain point. The Jedi had a certain status at a certain point in history. And I don't know how much of these is Fletcher now regrets not writing a 10-page essay in the comments. Yeah, some of these are kind of brutal to get through. But yeah, part of this is again, there's two different questions. One, what should we expect the Jedi to be like at this point in history? Should we expect them to be a little bit complacent, incompetent, whatever? Maybe. But if that happens, maybe not logically within the world, but dramatically, you need a protagonist who is a voice of reason and understands something. That's just me. I think if this is just the reality of that universe, that's fine, but you need somebody pushing back. That's my perspective anyway. On top of that, how much of this is really what George Lucas was left or he had to work with, and how much of this was just what he chose to create? So are we just taking what he put in the story as for granted as a necessary part of it? I'm not sure. But I think the story just would have been better if at least someone was competent, even if the Jedi in general were just kind of lost. And I don't know, if the Jedi were all fully aware, I guess the whole thing wouldn't have worked. But and handle exception, midi-chlorians. I remember groaning in my theater seat when I heard about the midi-chlorians. I felt so let down. That and Jar Jar did me in. Yeah, I say that I mentioned that Jar Jar didn't ruin the series, but he wasn't great. I will say that. I was really annoyed by him. I still stand by the fact that if the movie was really good, he would have just been a momentary annoyance. You can put up with a character who's silly if the rest of the movie captures the actual tone it's going for, and if the rest of the story is good. Midi-chlorians, that just did so much to demystify the Star Wars universe and the Force, and that's just totally incomprehensible to me. Tyler, the content creator, says Harakiri, sorry if I'm not pronouncing it right, is a great movie about the incompetence of the samurai establishment. Has a tragic backstory. The difference is how that and Revenge of the Sith are executed. Jessica Bell says, thank goodness I don't have access to a microphone and camera. Otherwise, I'd make a 5-hour video essay on all my opinions of Star Wars. That's something I probably definitely would have done 20 years ago. I don't know. Maybe I would do it now if I don't know. It's interesting stuff. I just have not been in it well enough to get that deep into it. Fletcher says, Harikari, again, sorry if I'm mispronouncing it, knows how to clearly, effectively communicate its themes. Kia Tiona says, I definitely agree with Zod, though. Part of what made the sequel to my favorite book not as good as the first is that my two favorite characters don't really do anything important until the end. Yeah, also midichlorians, anonymous insignificant person, their contradiction to Yoda explanation. It just, we don't even need to go into that. I hope most of us are in agreement about that. Why in the world you would make them little bugs or whatever they were. Oof. King Biden, my prez. Oh, interesting name. I love Zod. I love all Star Wars equally. I have no problem with anyone expressing their thoughts. In fact, I know I'm going to love this. It's just a big old love fest with me. Well, thank you very much. You know, that's what this is all about. We're all just fans to one degree or another, probably, if we're watching this stuff, and we're all going to have different feelings. And if you have the humility to recognize that you're just coming from a perspective that's probably largely based on what age you were when you watch which movie and stuff like that, it's all good. Star Wars arguments were like, they were vicious back in the early days of the internet. I don't know if it's still that way. If you find the wrong corners, probably. Chicken Pants. There's an outstanding novel about Darth Plagueis, Palpatine's Sith mentor. The novel would make a far better prequel than the films we got. Very well could be. I don't know. I think one thing is that no matter what the subject matter, it just depends on how the films are made. I think that's one common thread that we see here a lot. Jessica Bell says, Jar Jar is the one who proposed the motion to grant unilateral power for a galactic army. He's the single most important person in the trilogy. I've heard that, I think, before. But of course, there's the role he played, and then there's him as a character. Two different things. Drew Harrison, I think part of the problem is that the character's motivations are so shallow. Palpatine was just evil. I don't know what really made Anakin become Vader. Not sure why Yoda used the clones. Yeah, I think that's a big part of it too. And this is mostly in execution of how they're depicted. All the pieces made to make sense, but what you show them doing and how you show them reacting to things, it just didn't feel human. They all felt like weird robots. I don't think there's anything new in saying that. But if Palpatine just being evil, I could see that. Him being a slightly one-dimensional character, having something more to that would have been cool. But if he is just basically a force of evil in the show and everybody else was behaving in a more human way, I could at least buy into that. But yeah, Yoda, I don't know. My personal opinion is Yoda shouldn't have been running around swinging a lightsaber. That just, even if it makes some logical sense, it just did not feel like his character. It totally bastardized who he was from Empire Strikes Back, just from a purely aesthetic perspective, even if it logically makes sense. But he didn't, I don't know. He didn't seem like the wise character from the original movies. Maybe he grew a ton as he sat in a swamp after the first movie, or after the prequel trilogy. But I felt like there should have been something more there. Everybody just felt so vapid. And again, I just could never get my head around what they were trying to do as humans. It just didn't feel like it made sense to me. I can't think of the midichlorians without thinking about the Earl Nuts parodies where it's a euphemism. Okay. Have you heard of the Darth Jar Jar fan theory? That's actually going to be one of the comments, so we'll wait till we get there. The Nurk twins, I agree with everything you said here, and honestly, I think it boils down to Lucas needing to start with a good kid and end with Vader and not being good enough writer to make that happen organically and realistically. That's probably 90% of this or more. It's just how it plays out. And part of this is maybe the reason we got Phantom Menace as it was, with Darth Vader being a tiny little kid, is he was hitting it with too blunt a hammer. So basically, started with him being a cute kid, and by movie 2, he's just a total brat. Having him start, I think, as an adult, and then just falling to normal human motivations and emotions, and if you did that with any kind of subtlety, it could have been a lot better. Jessica Bell, both Anakin actors were great. I think they were good enough actors. I feel so bad for the kid who played young Anakin, though. Oof. I don't think he probably had a good life following that. The biggest flaw with the prequels, Darth Tingle Binks, uh, isn't the prequel, but that everything that should have been in the prequels was instead an animated series that was 30 times better, and that Jar Jar Binks didn't get a solo trilogy to explain how he's really behind everything that happens in the galaxy. There's a lot of interesting takes packed into a relatively short comment there. I think the biggest thing I'm hearing here is that they're not as good by comparison to the animated series. I've never watched the Clone Wars animated series. Maybe I should sometime. I saw a little bit of it and it just felt like a lot to watch. I don't watch a ton of TV or movies on my own unless I'm watching with somebody else. So I've fallen behind on a lot of stuff, I guess. Maybe Tyler, the content creator, when you come over here, you should make me watch more Clone Wars or something. Interesting question. What do you do when you see a totalitarian regime rising around you? For me, I'd probably make a snarky comment on a YouTube channel about how the thought hits a little too close to home. Yeah, it probably does. This could get depressing really fast. We're living in a world with just a much less competent Emperor Palpatine, I guess. Well, Mr. Zod, I've been following you for years, but you have insulted my favorite murder teddy bear, so now we are enemies. Just kidding. I love all of the Star Wars movies, but they are pretty flawed. I think that's a fair take. Obviously, being sarcastic about my comments about Ewoks. They back in the day, they got as much hate as Jar Jar did. People despised the Ewoks. There was a group of people, they called themselves FART, fans of blank teddy bears, using a derogatory word for differently abled people. Yeah, again, it's the same thing. That movie could have been fine, even with the not the Jawas, the Ewoks, if the rest of the movie, I think, had been a little better. There's a lot in there, and I don't want to dig it too much into Return of the Jedi. It was okay, but very uneven. But I guess it's harder to buy when little teddy bears are actually like destroying stormtroopers and stuff. That breaks the spell a bit. Back to chat. Anonymous insignificant person. I think I heard that they cast a significantly younger actor than Anakin was supposed to be. However, I'm not entirely certain. Haven't heard that. Could very well be. Drew Harrison. Not that they were the best actors, but bad writing ruins even the best performance. The Anakin actors had bad scripts and probably poor direction. Yeah, I've heard that George Lucas is a famously bad person to act for, even in the first movie. I think he had such specific things in mind, and he really inhibited his actor's ability to get things across. I am shocked by the attempted rehabilitation of these films, and in the same boat as you, Zod, I don't care that much anymore. I watched the 3 sequels, and after the first one, I knew I was done with Star Wars. I watched the next 2 just because, and now it's oversaturated beyond belief. Yeah, I'm more or less in the same boat. It feels weird until it feels like recently, but I don't have a good sense of time at my age. The prequels being bad was just kind of taken for granted, and now it's shifted a lot. I don't know how much of it's like an intentional rehabilitation and how much of it is just as the generation who watched that grows up, there's going to be more nostalgic attachment to it. And then also, to be fair, maybe it's not as irrational as them just being nostalgically attached to it. It's just that they don't have the same disappointment that our generation had due to our irrational attachment to the original movie. So who knows what it is? Big mess of things. Watched the original as a preteen and loved it, but recall thinking it should have ended with a Death Star's destruction. The medal ceremony was pointless. Loves The Empire Strikes Back. Didn't understand why the Empire didn't just napalm the Ewoks. I don't know. I think maybe they would have destroyed the shield generator. You can't go too far in trying to understand Star Wars' weaponry. It's totally incomprehensible and silly. They're basically using, along with lightsabers as swords, they're using World War II era technology depicted in space, so it makes no sense. They probably could have just thrown nukes at everything half the time. Generally assumed remakes and reboots will not be somewhat disappointing. Tapped out there and leaving Star Wars was a happy childhood memory, and so on. That captures a lot of how I feel too. Yeah, somewhere in the sequel trilogy. Well, I kind of got burnt out on the prequels, but then somewhere in the sequels, I'm just like, it's fine. Part of my perspective, and this doesn't have anything to do with like dumping on any specific movie or Star Wars in general. Part of it's just my perspective. I just take each movie for what it is in any like series or whatever. And I think as I've aged, I've developed a lot more tolerance for comedy relief, for a little bit of silliness and inconsistencies in movies, and just accepting them for what they are. Back when I was younger, and I think a lot of people are this way, I had a lot more investment in explaining away, mistakes in movies, having it be more dramatically consistent, and then having an entire universe or canon be consistent. And now it's just like, enjoy the good parts and don't care so much about the bad parts. Heresy, you just love sand. I liked that one. There's an Australian director out there who made his career defending the sequels. I'm not going to read this whole thing. I'm sorry if you wrote this. There's the whole thing about practical effects and digital effects and the context around that. Yeah, there's a whole conversation there. I don't even know that like a number of practical effects is what makes or breaks anything, but definitely I think the reliance on digital effects, especially the way the movies were filmed, didn't help the feel of the scope. The story is both slower and lesser, and so on. I think that's a lot of it. It's just the pace of the stories. Oh, we got a new person in here. I'm sorry, I'm reading chats a little less because I just need to get through some of these comments. Hey, howdy, you're my favorite YouTuber, man. Your Hobbit video was the best. Very well done. Well, thank you very much. Didn't get that much traction in terms of views, but I enjoyed making it. I'm glad that some people liked it. It was a fun thing to revisit the Hobbit book. Zadi, I'm anxious to see what you'll say. Edit. As the prequels, they're surprising. I really loved the movies, and Jar Jar made me laugh. I guess Lucas was trying to get new audiences to like Star Wars. I didn't even know Anakin would be Darth Vader, so it hit me differently. Yeah, it makes sense. Again, this is going to feel way different when you're a kid. Maybe even if you're not like a grown-ass adult who's expecting too much out of a Star Wars movie like I was, even though I was a very young adult at the time. Nebraska nerd. Interested if you had any thoughts on the Darth Jar Jar theory. Not really. I don't even fully know what this is. I have a general sense, and fill me into the chat if you'd like to. I have a general sense that the Darth Jar Jar thing is that because, like I think Jessica said, he was a pivotal character who I think helped turn power over to the Emperor. He was like, a substitute senator or something like that. And he proposed the vote to turn emergency powers over to Palpatine. I think that's, again, tell me if I'm wrong. So I'm guessing that this theory is that he's actually a Sith Lord and he played that role on purpose or something. Again, tell me if I'm wrong. I don't know. I don't put much into that. I think he was in the movie. It seemed like he was just portrayed as a buffoon. I think it was unnecessary to have him in that scene to begin with, but it is what it is. I personally don't think that's probably what was intended. That for me, it doesn't enhance my reading of the movie at all, but that's what's fun is it's just fun to explore these things and people come up with their own take on the texts. Two comments here, consolidated from Gornzer. People get older and change. You can't manufacture nostalgia. I think they're speaking to Lucas's attempt probably at trying to manufacture nostalgia. It seems like he couldn't really recapture nostalgia for the old audience quite so much, at least at the time, but I think he created nostalgia for the new audience, our new generation of viewers. And once the giant hamster scene hit, I was done with Star Wars. That's fair. Attack of the Clones did a lot, I think, to check me out. Phantom Menace was a shock to the system. Attack of the Clones was just so long and dreary, and that might have done more to wear me out on it personally. Out of the Deep. I think every pre-1999 Star Wars fan has their own alternate version of the prequels. Mine starts when 17-year-old Bail Organa and his twin sister, playing hooky from the royal court duties, crash land on a remote pastoral moon. Not sure what that all means. Some of it sounds a little weird. I will say that all the fans prior to the Phantom Menace, especially in the 80s when we were all a bit younger, we probably had a lot of a picture of what the prequels were like, or what at least they might have felt like in our heads. There was even a fan written episode 3. I can't Follow the Republic or something like that, way back on the early internet, tracing back to there. It was being passed around, and a lot of people thought it was an actual script. But at least, even back to when I was like probably like elementary school, I had some picture in my head of what I thought the prequels felt like, and they felt a lot more just generally sober and whatever than the movies turned out being. Mad Dog said, and welcome another new viewer here. My first Star Wars experience was the Clone Wars show. I think it's some of the best Star Wars media. Maybe I'll check it out. I still need to get to Andor. I heard that's really, really good. My other son, who's not here right now, he told me I should get into it. I saw the first episode, and again, I just don't have a lot of time to watch stuff, or I don't choose to make time to watch that much stuff. Cool Keith Productions. I just came here to just like this trash, and now I'm gone. Cool. I appreciate the engagement. I don't know how to take those, if people are just joking or if they really are just drive-by shitting on me. Stuff happens all the time. Unpopular opinion. I liked the prequels. I don't think that's as unpopular as it used to be. Definitely some silliness, but it's a movie series about a war in a galaxy far, far away. Star Wars is a huge part of my childhood, and I counted the minutes until I saw Phantom Menace in the cinema at 99. So this sounds like somebody who had liked Star Wars previously and enjoyed the Phantom Menace, which is a different perspective, but I can appreciate it. At its core, Star Wars is all relatively silly. I think there can be more or less gravitas to it, but you can't expect too much out of it. You have to expect some silliness, whether that's overt silliness in the form of some kind of comic relief, or just, you're watching a show about lasers and aliens and stuff like that. It's inherently a little bit goofy. Okay, that's exaggerating. There's a lighthearted element to it, I think, on some level, even though you can make something better out of it. I think a lot of your critiques, Christmas 815, are somewhat rectified in the Clone Wars series. I don't think the show excuses the issues in the movies, but helps at least see the movies in a better light. So similar to, I think, our second comment. And I'd just say the same thing, and I think that's what this person is saying. It doesn't really fix the movies. It's a question of what exists in the universe versus what actually makes that one piece of media better. Drew Harrison, I just want to acknowledge, she's saying something about Lucas didn't even necessarily want to flesh out the entire backstory, and he said, I hate writing beginnings. I think that's very insightful on his part, because, again, I think the prequels could have been very good movies, but it's sorry, I spaced out there for a second. Yeah, I think it could have just existed better as mythology in people's heads. I don't know. It's just an idea. Jessica Bell says Attack of the Clones is such a depressing, soul-wrenching movie. Everyone is beating the drums of war. Militarization is about to start. We have an opportunity to stop it from starting, but we fail. I probably understate what I think of Attack of the Clones. I think that stuff is there, but they could have captured it way more dramatically. But some of the scenes I liked most, they did. When I was trying to hold on to hope for these prequels, and in my mind, at least watching them originally, given my personal hopes for Star Wars, when they would show the stormtroopers marching out and all the proto Star Destroyers hovering overhead and stuff like that, it felt like it was starting to capture that. I just don't feel like personally they really captured and hung on to that tone for much. In that moment, and when he went after the Sand People, I felt like there was something there, even though in hindsight, I think that's a little severe and just out of the blue, even though I get the logic of it. I don't know. I just personally don't think they held on to that to my personal satisfaction. But again, who knows how much of that is just my hopes as a previous Star Wars viewer. Zach Attack 29 says, I will be posting a response video to this in a few days. The Jedi aren't heroes. They're just another form of evil. Well, I look forward to our long, fruitful rivalry. The Jedi's the Jedi not being heroes. That's an interesting idea. They definitely didn't come across as very heroic. They were overly stoic, just kind of dry and bland, and also just incompetent. That's an interesting reading of the story, but I think part of the problem with the story is that the fact that it either depicts that or is muddy enough that you can get it from it, which I think that's a reasonable thing to pick up from it, just shows that I don't think the movies had a well-constructed and effective body of protagonists for the sake of, constructing a good drama. Again, just my take, and I've said that many times. Devious Dave, pretty good to varying degrees, but really overblown. Watching episodes 4, 5, and 6 recently, I thought the same. Yeah. It's really hard to watch. Sorry. It's really hard to watch any Star Wars with a purely objective mindset. I really think 4 and 5 were quite good movies. 4 was a little, I don't know, some of the filmmaking techniques were pretty basic, and I think it's pretty well known for that. But those two were pretty darn good movies, at least very good at capturing space opera drama. But yeah, it's really hard to just totally objectively compare the quality of the movies to the phenomena that they became. And I'm saying this as somebody who is largely swept up in the phenomena. It was especially going back to my childhood. Anonymous Insignificant Person, good night. Thanks for joining me. I am going to be wrapping up here pretty soon, but I know that almost everywhere is later than it is here, so I understand if people need to go to sleep for sure. Kind of, Tiona, I mean, they are evil, though, way too eager to kidnap children and chop up anyone who gets in their way. Yeah, I mean, I think they were just depicted in a really muddled way in the movies. It's just part of the problem is people had built up so much expectation of what the Jedi were, both from watching the movie, and I even remember getting a lot of my picture of them from other forms of media. Like I'd bought in a Star Wars role playing book when I was a young adult, and tried getting into that, and I never really understood how to do role playing stuff. But I remember a lot of different lore about the Jedi written in there, and so I think there was so much expectation going into the movies of what the Jedi were like. I think Lucas, to be fair, kind of had an impossible task to please everybody. Jessica, it's 2 p.m. here in Melbourne, Australia. I don't even know that I knew you lived in Australia, which maybe I should feel silly about because I know you've been around quite a bit. I've always thought that your small emulations of Harry Plinkett's vocal style really funny. Keep it up. Yeah, for some reason I've dropped little references to Plinkett and a couple other people in videos randomly, even going back to my original channel. So I don't know. I don't know why I do it. It's just kind of Plinkett specifically sticks in my head, and some of the stuff just rolls off my tongue when I'm doing stuff. Fletcher from the Deep says, I never noticed Sod's Plinkett emulations, but my brain did. Bob Avik Chev, I don't know how to say that. Sorry. You should get leg lengthening surgery and be 6'9". That's an idea for sure. I'm not sure I really want to do that though. I'm happy being 6'3". I'm too old to start getting stuff like that done. Mil Kenobi, there's a lot to dislike about the prequels, but two things that really annoy me. Anakin and his mother are slaves. I'm going to blow through some of this, but this has been an obviously silly thing. They're very comfortable looking slaves who seem to have a lot of free time. It's like Lucas wanted them to be slaves with sanitized slavery. This is a problem with a lot of it, and I think Plinkett and others have said this. It tells you things are bad, but doesn't really convey it. So it tells you they're slaves, but doesn't really convey them in a life of slavery. Hats off history. Not sure who Plinkett is, but your vocal style is awesome. Thank you. I'm especially grateful for your switch from 100% scripted to what I can only assume is mostly, but not entirely scripted. Yeah. So there's different things. Back when I was purely scripted, people did say that some of my vocal cadence and delivery sounded like Plinkett. But then there was a separate thing, which is where I would consciously imitate him in the way I said certain things and actually repeat some of his lines. I do like my switch from 100% scripted because I developed some really, really, really bad repetitive patterns in how I spoke when I was reading from a script. And so now I do script out my videos, but I look at a paragraph or two and mostly memorize it and also just fill in and I turn to the camera and just like say it. So and then episode 3, fumbling of Padme, basically they totally nerfed her from being an interesting character to just crying and stuff. I see some expectations about Watto as a slave owner. He taught them valuable skills and stuff like that. I don't know, maybe. And again, there are different possibilities, including me just being wrong and missing something. Is there an in-world explanation, and is that totally adequate? Maybe. And again, maybe I'm just missing something. But it also seems a little bit like it's not just the question of is there a justification, but also what would be more dramatically effective. And I feel like having things be so sanitized, it's missing something. But on the other hand, this is supposed to be partly a movie for kids, and do you really want to show? Oh, Fletcher's says he's being facetious. Okay, sorry. It's really hard to tell, and honestly, it's because everybody comes from such different perspectives on these movies, and there are so many. The whole thing's just so subjective, and so I don't know. It's hard to. Ron DeSantis says, "Oh, geez, okay, I get what you're going there." But yeah, it's I don't know. It's hard to tell. I think more could have been done to portray their plight, even for a movie that's friendly to kids. This is a really long one. I'm going to see what I want to. Subtly influencing. There's a lot in this one. I guess I can't even get too much into this without really getting bogged down, so I'll mostly skip over it. I think a lot of the same justifications that I've already covered in other comments. And then last comment tonight. Oh, and I think Zach Attack is probably, if it's Zach A, this person's in the comment. Looks like similar name and your logo looks the same. So your critiques, I think there's more in the second one that was a little more unique. Critiques are all valid opinions, but one thing that bothered me was this line: battles are supposed to be something where you care if one side wins. Yeah, this is actually an interesting one, and I don't want to read too much of it just because that's it's just a lot to make everybody sit and listen to. But both of these comments are actually pretty interesting. So if you go back to the original video, I would recommend reading these from Zach Attack 29. I just don't want to stop and read whole more developed comments in the stream. But this is an interesting question. Battles aren't supposed to be I think battles aren't supposed to be something where one side wins over another, or if you care for one side over another. That essentially warfare is inherently tragic or inherently kind of, I think what he gets at here, from what I remember, nobody wins a war, and they're all opportunistic and basically, I'm partly paraphrasing here. It's a lot of, rich, powerful people sending poor people to their deaths and stuff like that, and labeling people as terrorists and stuff. So I get that. And I don't, this introduces a good question about what I said and how I expressed it. Because what do you do with war on screen? Uh, you need to have protagonists, you need to care about the outcome, but how do you use war as a vehicle to do this without glorifying it? And I think that's kind of a point I had missed. So, well, part of my issue is maybe you don't need to care who wins the well, I don't know. Partly in Star Wars does just simplify that. The good guys are fighting against the bad guys. It's rebels fighting against a tyrannical empire. So, but within this one, I think I would go back to my point, which is that want you don't necessarily want to root for one side or the other of the battle. I think maybe there's just a better forum for, who you hope to win or lose than of the battles themselves. So use the battles more as a backdrop. And maybe I'm missing something or lost a little bit of it over time in hindsight. But I felt like the good guys were just going through the motions in the battle and participating in these things side by side with clones who are supposed to be the bad guys. I don't know. So I'm losing my train of thought here a little bit. It's getting a little late. My voice is starting to give out a little bit, but I would say maybe just separate the hoped outcome from the battles, or use the battles in a different way, sideline them a little bit, something like that, and have the more the main conflict be in the people who are resisting the emperor. Jessica Bell said slavery question was about freedom, being able to decide where you want to live and stuff. I do. Yeah. I mean, even though it was extremely lax slavery, I do like the point about Anakin yearning for freedom and Luke yearning for freedom. It's like poetry, it rhymes, as I think George Lucas said. And I think there is something there. Maybe it could have been executed more, or again, that's where this gets most subjective. So maybe it was just great and I'm missing a lot of it. We're down to the last couple. Oh, here's the last one. Zod's version, episode 1, The Specific Menace. I think that's probably meant, I'm not sure this one's, but I kind of like this quip. I think it's supposed to be a critique of me wanting Star Wars to be more specific about who the bad guys were. So instead of a Phantom Menace where there's this, kind of vague existential threat hanging over everything, I wanted to be a little too on the nose. Maybe that's true. If that's what you're saying, I kind of like that. I thought that was clever. So good job. So that's all the comments. Yes, No Eternal Gods. Tyler, the content creator, is my son. So, and yes, that is super cool. He's a cool guy. So that's pretty much it. Unless people have anything else to say, this went a little over an hour, and I probably need to wrap up for tonight. But I think this was fun. I enjoyed going through comments. I haven't been a ton into Star Wars, but it's kind of enjoyable just to go back and talk about this stuff. It's rehashing a lot of things that I was really into when I was younger, and Star Wars is still fun to talk about. They're imperfect movies. I do think they're a little bit overblown, but they are still really good, and they're a big cultural phenomenon and a kind of deep part of it. I don't know. They have a sorry, they played a deep role in our lives, and they're kind of a part of who we are in a big way. So I know even through the chat, there's a lot of people who have different perspectives than I do, and I hope I haven't come on too strong opposing anybody on that. I know that a lot of this is just super duper subjective and just comes from our personal perspective. So I can really, really respect people who like different things in the movies. And of all the things that we all argue over and struggle with each other about, having a different sense of perspective about Star Wars is probably one of the smallest ones. And if anything, I think it brings us all together because what we really share is an interest in these movies. So yeah, thanks all for joining. See you tomorrow, Jessica Bell, in response to your comment. And I think a lot of you might be going there already, but yeah, tomorrow we will be doing a Zadanza, 9 Eastern, 8 Central. Dan will be back, so I hope to see you all there. But have a good night, everybody. Thanks for joining. This was a lot of fun, and I hope to do more live streams. It's kind of fun just to get together and BS about stuff. So I'll see y'all later.